this one. Let's go. Awesome. Okay, so like we're saying, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us here today. Better Surveys Through Scary Movies is absolutely one of our favorite topics to talk about. It seems like a really weird combination of things, but I'm Melissa, and I usually talk about the survey side of things. This is Adam. I'll let him speak for himself.
I usually talk about a lot of movie things. So yeah, it's a good combo.
So we're really excited about this one. This topic, you're going to hear a lot of these cliches that we talk about over and over again related to horror movies, the sort of cliches that we love to hate. We recognize them. We know like, oh my gosh, this thing is going to happen again. And yet for some reason, we are drawn to these kinds of movies. We just love watching like the cliche play out or sort of the expected, unexpected as well too. And as you can tell, obviously, there's a lot of overlap between what can happen with your survey project, unfortunately, and what can happen as well with these scary movies. So a few laughs and a few lessons, hopefully, along the way here. You know, I don't want to sell us too high, but I think it's a pretty entertaining session. So if you have to drop off for whatever reason, we will be glad to send you this recording as well, too, and have this content in a little bit more processable format as well, too, on our blog. So without too much further ado, Adam, I will give you Be Afraid, or maybe not, right? This is the scary movie part and the lesson. So don't, Adam, open the door.
Don't open the door anytime in the movie. The protagonist, it doesn't even need to be the protagonist. Any character, you know something in a scary movie, you know something not good is behind that door. Like in that there are plenty of, like, they have like the dark red door or whatever, like, you know, nothing good is going to come from it. Luckily for us, in reality, usually there's nothing actually bad behind the door.
Probably, in most cases, right?
Most likely, yeah.
You can tell we're going to start the flow from the process from the beginning to end, and getting started is really one of the scariest scariest things for people sometimes. We actually have a webinar called Getting Started, because that is one of the most critical pieces. Every onboarding we do, it's like, you know, a little bit of cheerleading and a little bit of tech help, right? It's like, you can do it. Don't be afraid. You have nothing to lose, right? So in this scary movie, you have everything to lose, unfortunately. But in this case, you should be good to go. So get started. That's the first lesson.
And even B movies bring their A game. So typically you'll see with a lot of, most Halloween seasons, you'll see a lot of scary movies come out. And as Melissa and I talked about before we got rolling on this call, sometimes even in February. And the reason you see such a high frequency for scary movies is because film studios, it doesn't take a lot for film studios to invest in making a scary movie. And they often make their money back and a lot more money on top of that. So it's a high return on investment for most movie studios, which is why you see it very often. If you look at the Paranormal Activity movies, for example, that first one, extremely low budget, and it had an insane return on investment and was one of the biggest movies of that year.
Absolutely. And the thing, of course, here is that it does take work for all of these films to get made. And, you know, a little bit of elbow grease sometimes more than budget, right? So the same thing is often true in your survey development. Like, it doesn't take a lot of money usually, like, to at least get started. But the time and effort that it takes pretty much always pays off, as long as you're following all the rest of the good lessons that we'll talk about today too. It's worth the investment, and it's usually a relatively minor investment for the kind of return that you can get. And you don't even have to wear this gorgeous costume. You could probably just wear your own clothes, right? we debated whether this was this guy's actual outfit or if this was, obviously you bring something of yourself, so you're using your resources wisely, both in the survey development and the B movie game.
Stand back, I'm an expert. So the situation has been laid out, and someone within the group of the horror movie is like, guys, everybody, don't worry, I got this, not a big deal. And it is a big deal, and they do not have this. So you know it's going to go wrong. You know that it's gonna be a mess. They're either going to end up, getting someone else in harm's way or getting themselves in harm's way. And, sometimes it can be a fun watching experience. Other times it can be a frustrating watch experience. And it really just depends on the movie. But either way, the expert is never the only person that can solve the issue.
It's totally the truth, of course, too. In survey design and development, a lot of times we feel like we're on our own because we're the ones like, oh, how do I phrase this? We feel like we're the only ones who can do it. We do have clients who are, very, experienced researchers or have done a lot of these kinds of projects before, for example, but it's usually not a good idea. I'm just going to say never, because it's usually not, sounds more polite, but it's never a good idea to do something totally on your own too. If you are working as part of a team, you've got other people there who are either to support you or you're there to support them. Either way, especially if you're not the person who's going to be using the results, you need to think down the road about like how all this information is going to be used, it's going to be processed. And even if you have that, really deep experience in research, for example, you might not have a lot of experience in our platform or in this specific subject that you're working on. So having those experts on your team, those critical friends, is so important. Usually the expert, unfortunately, in a lot of these films doesn't come back from this initial foray with the flare against the dinosaur. So yeah, we definitely want you all to make it safely through the project and remain with a good working relationship. There's nothing worse than one person goes out and does a project and then everyone else needs the results and there's no correlation between like what the questions that were asked and the answers that are delivered. Like if that's not what I need to know, why did you do this? This is, let's just say, bad for team dynamics at the very minimum.
And speaking of bad for team dynamics, the team's out and their car stops in the middle of a very creepy road leading to a very creepy house. And the only option is they have to go and hope that this house has a phone that they can use because their cell reception isn't working or anything like that. They're hoping this person has a landline maybe they can use. And once that door opens, trouble's brewing. Like, they're not going to go into the house, be like, hey, yeah, I called a friend, like they're coming to pick us up in 30. Thanks so much. And the person's like, yeah, all right, sweet. Have a good day. It's never going to work that way. First of all, it wouldn't be a very interesting, scary movie, not a scary movie at all. But also, we just know from these cliches that we've been talking about, it's not how it goes. That is ultimately using the wrong resource that is immediately available to them.
Okay. And usually the situation is that it's the only resource that's available for them by that point. Like that long and winding road, it only leads to one door at this in this kind of a scene. There's not like, oh, let's just go a little bit farther down the road. I don't like the look of that house. Someone will inevitably say, like, this is our last chance. This is our best bet. And if you're in that situation where, it's desperate times and desperate measures, it's usually the worst time to be asking for help. Even somebody who's a great expert on your team or a strong resource may not be able to help you at that point if you've gone too far afield. And so having the right resources lined up in advance to know like who are the champions on my team for each of these topics, that's invaluable. Otherwise, you're stuck with the person who, maybe you're working late. Back in the day when we used to work in an actual office, right? Like maybe you're working late and it's the only other person in the room and you have to be like, hey, can you come look at this? If that person has no expertise whatsoever, it may or may not be useful at all to even ask them. So making sure that you've got the right resources and you're not ending up in dire straits, let's say. Although the band is fine, just not the situation.
Let's investigate in the dark. So maybe no one's at that abandoned house, but it's the middle of the night and all the lights are turned out, but they're hoping maybe there's a landline, which doesn't make much sense, but we're just going with the flow. When you're in the theater, you just sort of have to roll with it. So they go investigate in the dark. And in scary movies, whenever it's like pitch black, it's never just like, oh, the breaker tripped. Let's go fix that real quick.
But we're fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it turns back on and it's good. That they're gonna find like all the wires pulled out or stuff like that. It's never good to go investigating in the dark. One, because they don't know what they're getting into, and two, they can't even see what they're getting into. And if you look at this person right here, you can see right under the text box, there's a little silhouette that's not too far behind that person.
I censored it, right? I put it there intentionally, right? Just so you wouldn't be afraid looking at the slide.
I appreciate it because I just know the silhouette's there, but beyond that is up to imagination. So, but anyways, going into the dark is never a good idea.
Great. And the scenario, of course, here is that we have questions to ask. Of course, we need to ask those questions, but those questions don't exist in a vacuum. They exist with context. They exist with additional information. And so even when you're starting to ask those questions, it is ludicrous to ignore everything else around you in the interest of just those questions. This slide and the next slide, spoiler, are very much focused on context. The context that you have helps you from stumbling blindly around, which is literally what you're doing in this scenario. But it's embarrassing, it's disrespectful sometimes. It means that your results could be totally unreliable or invalid because you don't know something else that's really important that's going on. In this scenario for right now, like if you had planned a study of, let's say, October 2020, and you had planned it last year, everything would totally have changed, right? Like we're doing an employee engagement study coming up. If I had planned that too far in advance, sure, it's fine to have the structure, but investigating that framework, that context is so important before you go live with that, because the world has changed. Like your questionnaire is maybe still relevant, but you do need to have that sensitivity in that context of what else is going on. Ignorance is never bliss in this case, and it's usually not when you're in the dark either, let's say.
And speaking of context, listen to the music in horror movies. You'll hear either the music building up and you know that there's going to be a spook, or you'll hear no music at all and you know things are not going to go well, because then you know when there's dead silence, something's going to break that silence, and it's never just going to be a random noise by chance.
Mm-hmm.
And we can tell through context that things are amping up. All right, this is the climax, or this is when a scare is going to come. And you can tell that with all scary movies. It's very, very rare that you'll find a scary movie that subverts the context that comes with the musical orchestra.
I thought you're going to go with subverts the paradigm, and I was going to be like, wow, Adam, it's a little early for that kind of language here. But yeah, totally. I think we've also talked about it too, that sometimes it's the silence that's the scariest thing. And if you don't hear anything, that's usually a bad sign too, right? So this is sort of not only listening to your team, your experts, the broader context, even your audience as well too, knowing that sometimes the tone here, what the music is often doing is just setting the tone of the situation, sharing you like, this is something about the feeling. It's not necessarily a clue by itself, unless you can hear it, in which case it would be really helpful. But the tone of that conversation is really, really important as well too. And it's the same thing. Just like I said, if you're reaching out to people who are actually working from home or really stressed about, their health or their personal lives in general, that sets a different tone. You've got to come in with that sensitivity to that context of what's going on. Otherwise, you come off as like tone deaf, right? That like you have no sensitivity, you have no awareness of the people that you're talking to. It's robotic, or we're asking the same questions because we did last year, or because we always do, something like that. Context always matters when you're having conversations. It matters in a survey as well too, because it's just like a conversation. And if you're not aware of those shades, it can make a huge difference too. So would it be creepy if you had scary music playing when you were, doing your survey? Probably. But I think any of us, some of us, I think, I don't know, Adam, would you like to have background music in your life? Just in general?
Yeah, I think like more triumphant moments than scary moments.
Sure.
Probably wouldn't prefer it.
Yeah.
Anxious about something and have the music, it probably wouldn't help. But yeah.
When you walk into a room, like wrestling style, like entrance music, or baseball, like walk-up music, like it's Melissa.
That would be cool. Yeah,
that'd be okay. But none of this where you're sitting at your desk at night and it's like yeah, that's usually a bad sign.
Yeah, not true. And speaking of bad signs, so the crazy guy is always right. The teenagers are looking at the creepy house, deciding whether like, that house has been there for ages and we've never seen anyone go in and out or whatever. The crazy person, let's check it out. And the crazy person pops out and is like, oh, that talks about this huge legend with the house, and everyone's sort of like, okay, yeah, whatever. And they just go in anyways. And the crazy guy's right. Like we know whatever this person's saying. Maybe there are some small embellishments, but for the most part, this person's on like is pretty accurate about what's happening in that creepy house. And the people who blew him off find out a little bit too late that they should have believed him earlier on.
Yeah, it's that suspension of disbelief, right, that we have as viewers, where it's like, oh, well, I'm pretty sure that's going to be important, actually. Whatever the thing is, we know, like we're familiar with this genre. It's sometimes that like knowing something that the character doesn't know gives you that weird sort of, the same as the music. Like we know, because that's why we know to be scared, because we know that that's what this film is going to be about. Watching those signs, like knowing what to expect, knowing what to anticipate. Again, context is useful, having the right experts in advance. The warning signs that you see may come very early. There could be people who say, that's the day before a holiday. And you say, yeah, but I'm sure everyone will participate. No, they won't, right? Oh, what if we do it really early in Thanksgiving week? It's still Thanksgiving week. So depending on the holidays, depending on the context that you have, sure, there are always naysayers, right? Who's like, oh, that'll never work. This will never happen. But sometimes you'll get those very specific things like, I don't think we should do it on a Monday because everyone's always swamped. Their inbox is overwhelmed, all those kinds of things. Those things really do matter. When you're talking now, of course, we're moving down the process. We're thinking that we're almost getting ready to launch this survey, hopefully, because we have so much context and so much good expert advice too. But the more expert advice that you solicit from the correct resources, the ideal people in your team, make sure that you ask them, like, what can go wrong? Obviously, we're going to come back to this one too, but sometimes you really need to draw it out of people because, we have this sort of like, oh, great, fine. People aren't always geared toward giving feedback, especially if it's going to be slightly negative. Like, oh, be careful about that kind of thing. But in films, they have to come out and say it because we have to keep the plot moving. So,
or the classic, the main character is eating breakfast and turns on the television and something that they're ignoring, but we know is super important.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it used to be, it flips up the newspaper and the headline
Yeah.
is like, man reading newspaper gets, stabbed, something like terrible. Like it's like, come on. As
just immediately reading the comics. And you're like, all right. Well.
Yeah, he's fine. Everything's good. Yeah, technology, it matters.
Plot. So their plot twist. Plenty of horror movies have them, and plot twists can be good for the characters, and it could be bad for the characters. Sometimes the characters' backs are against the wall, and they find out that it's a secret passageway. Yeah, exactly. Just wow, how convenient. Or other times, they're stuck in traffic, or they're going to be stuck in traffic, and then an octopus attacks a bridge, and you're like, all right, well, I guess, yeah. If I had a nickel for every time this yeah. But plot twists happen in all these films, and as I said, it could be good for the characters, it could be bad for the characters. Sometimes it's a deus ex machina. It's usually out of the character's control, that, oh no, this terrible thing's happening, and then all of a sudden something, a third party comes in at the exact right time, at the exact right moment, doing the exact right thing, which makes sense for movies, but doesn't always happen in real life.
A lot of times they come up against the wall because, oh, our budget ran out, so we need to, or wow, this film is going to be way too long. Let's wrap this up. Oh, a werewolf came and ate them all, right? So that planning in advance is always super important too. Like knowing, I feel like I've said the word resources a lot of times today already too. Like knowing what you have, knowing the time that you have available, knowing your constraints, all of those things. Unfortunately, you can't necessarily rely on someone to magically come in and wave their wand and everything works better. And well, in most cases, you don't have to worry about a giant octopus coming up and destroying your universe. Hooray for that! Or, little things to be grateful for. But definitely, right. Definitely, the idea that you are the one, you're sort of in charge of the master plan, means that you have to have a plan. Means that you have to have here logic. Logic is never a problem in these scary movies, like you said. Like, oh, it's a giant octopus. Oh, it's a trap door I just fell through because I accidentally pressed this one book. Like, okay, sure, that makes sense. And we go along with it because that's how the story is going to progress or end, because we just need to move on. This is really common in like the old serials, right? Not old breakfast cereals, but like old radio serials where it's like, I don't know, the cliffhanger. You can't have a cliffhanger in your survey. You have to know what's going to happen next. We see this sometimes with issues with logic, where there should have been logic. Like, I should never see a question on a survey that says, if you said yes to the preceding question, then we want to know. Don't show me the follow-up question if I didn't say yes initially. So literally setting up logic is really important too. And knowing where the path is going to lead. So when you're setting up, sure, QDL, that quick follow-up question display logic, but also branching. If you don't know where your participants are going to go, like, oh, just send them off. It's one of the most common errors that we see when people are setting up branching rules, because they know their decision question and they say, okay, you go over here and you go over here. But it's kind of unclear at the end, like, do those people come back together or do they have their own paths? Figuring out all of that stuff in advance. Make your own logic and luck, and don't send them down this path. It's not good.
The phone is dead. The car won't start. And in scary movies, it is always Murphy's Law ruling over everything. Whatever can go wrong will absolutely go wrong for the characters. And the characters don't really seem to be prepared in the case that something may go wrong, or like,
as if they didn't know that they were going to be in a horror movie. Like, hello.
someone had avoided that the check engine light for a while, and worst time finally gets to them.
You're about to enter a horror movie. Like, yeah, I would love to. If I saw a light like that on my car, I would definitely pull over.
Yeah, I have to go to the shop later today. I'm gonna be like, some crazy guy's gonna chase me tomorrow, so I kind of need to get this ready now. But often that doesn't happen. And it usually does not end well for our characters. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong for the characters in these films.
What can I add to this? Like, everything that we've already said before is that the number of things that can go wrong in a survey or research project is a significant number. Let's just say every project has its own challenges and its own rewards as well too, but it always has to do with, oh, I set up pre-population for these items, but what I got back from the database that I can put in my contact list doesn't match at all, right? Like, all of those kinds of things that's a significant challenge, right? Like, there's no match. I have to launch it in 20 minutes, or I don't have the contact list. There's always something, right? Like, some system goes down, whatever that is, right? And I can't say enough about this one, so you get the point.
Look out. So the camera's focusing in on a character, and then you see a hand behind their shoulder. And in these movies, it is one of two things. One, it is either the scary monster, and things are about to go from bad to worse, or two, it's like the teenager's friend who is purposely scaring them, and they're like, oh, hey, that wasn't nice. They don't usually say it as calmly as I did, but you understand the point. Yeah, that wasn't nice. All right, anyways, let's go check out the creepy house. But we all know, if we were in that situation, and we know the characters prefer, you'd much rather have it be the friend spooking you than the creepy monster spooking you.
Absolutely. This comes to, we're about ready to go live. This is about testing for me. This is like, obviously, this is about testing your survey. So we have that idea of sending it out to other people, the critical friends, the right people to send it out, not just the only other person left in the office other than you. Like, here it would be like my bird, because it's the only other bird being here. So definitely using those resources again. It can be really annoying, as I've said before, where people sometimes are like, oh, why did you use this font? Oh, I don't really like how this question is phrased. But it is important to do that outreach, like I said before, because otherwise those are potentially the people who need the results too. And so bear with it, recognize that slight annoyance, even though it's, that's the monster, it could be a slight annoyance because you feel like you're so close and you're so ready to go. Take the time, figure it out, because otherwise you're going to go live and it's the monster you don't like. The public, the audience that you're waiting to have participate is probably not going to be quite as kind. Shucks, they'll say, you messed up your branching rules. Like, they're not going to ever say that. They're going to be like, what is wrong with you? I'm not participating in this. Which brings us to...
And then there was one. So maybe that character got spooked by their friend, but decided like, all right, you know what? Forget you guys. I'm going to explore the creepy house by myself, which is probably not the greatest sentence. You know, when you say it out loud, it should probably hit the characters. Like, maybe that's not a good idea, but they do it anyways because they have to. That's just the rules. And then all of a sudden they go back to try to find their friends, and their friends are nowhere to be found. And now they are alone in this creepy house with no one around them. And personally, that's terrifying because I don't want to be in a creepy house even with a bunch of people. So being there by myself, not particularly fond of that. And we also know that for the main character, understandably, can be extremely distressing.
Yeah. The problem is when you go into that house, you don't know if you're the last person. Like, we know as the audience that like, this guy, it's not going to work out. She's in trouble. Like, okay, maybe this one has some hope. We don't always know necessarily, unless there's like one major actor, for example, that we're like, yeah, he's going to be okay, because he's definitely the title character. But this is the scariest. This is, if I had just chosen one slide here, this would be the slide that we would have, because for all the work, all of the testing, all of the prep, all the planning that goes in, the worst thing that can happen for so many of us is that we don't get the responses we'd like. And it doesn't mean this, it means that we don't get any responses. And so if you've set up this huge project, all of these things are in order, they look like they're going well, and it turns out they're not, there's a lot of questions to be asked, of course, which we'll follow up on in a minute here, but definitely that idea of all of this for you. Yeah, there should not be a main character in your survey audience. If you're sending it out to one person, first of all, that's just a little weird. Maybe just have a conversation. But there is no hero. Like, the hero is all of the people who are going to be responding to you, because there's a reason that you're reaching out to them. That's your target audience. Probably you want to hear from them, as many of them as possible.
It's never just the wind. You could be in a creepy basement like this one, or out camping in the woods with some friends, and the teenagers hear something rustling in the woods, and they're like, it's just like a squirrel or whatever. It's never just the wind. It's never just a squirrel. We always know it's a sign for worse things to come. We know it is the engine revving up of the horror or spookiness to begin. Spookiness.
The horror engine. Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, the horror. They just have it back there, just revving it up. But we know that it's never just like, oh wow, there's a storm pattern coming in. It's kind of weird. All right, anyways, and they go back to sleep. It never works that way in horror films.
Yeah, this is the clues. For some reason, people in horror films get clues all the time, and they choose to ignore them in order for the plot to continue, right? Otherwise, it'd be like, oh, we're safe. Like, I guess we should just lock the door, or I guess we should go out of town, something like that. But here, this starts to get into the idea of tracking, but it's listening to what's going on. So if you talk to your team members and you say, oh, what did you think? Have you had a chance to look at that survey? And they say, what survey? That's a bad sign. It could mean any number of things. It could mean you have the wrong email addresses. It could be that you have, they've set, there's firewalls blocking the delivery, for example, or, any number of different issues along the way too. So sort of putting out those feelers early to figure out what's going on. Rarely will people say, by the way, I just wanted to let you know that invitation that you sent me bounced. Like, that's not going to happen because they don't know, because they didn't get it. So there's not going to be this obvious clue. And it's never a squirrel. First of all, it's a squirrel causing problems with your movie. You've got any number of other issues instead.
The suspense is killing me. The last minute
too. Yeah.
The suspense is, I had to draw that one out. I want to set the tone. But the suspense is killing me. You can see it in plenty of horror movies. Things are building up, and referencing back to like an earlier slide, like when there's no music in a horror movie, you know something's going to break that silence. And it's the suspense between the music stopping and what breaks the silence is really where the suspense kind of revs up. And there are plenty of other examples. That's just the first one that comes to my mind when I'm watching a scary movie. And yeah, while our characters might not be able to hear the music stopping, they can definitely hear that nothing's happening until something pops off.
Exactly. It's usually right plenty slow. This monster is not coming at any pace, but so in the real world, things happen in real time, of course. And so this is where we start to talk about then track survey, looking at your reports in advance, that sort of thing. If you're just waiting, like holding your breath, this is one of the things that, for example, we do when we do managed projects for our clients. We make sure they know as soon as responses come in. We share that response trend report or response rate report, for example, to let you know, I'm not revealing any answers, but I'm letting you know that, this department has 80% participation and this department has 20%. So maybe let's do some targeted communication, follow up and say, hey, what design department, what's happening over here? Did you all get this? Go back and check those clues, make sure that they're getting reminders, send all of that information. By the time the survey is closed, it's too late to collect that. So find out that information in real time rather than, I hope someone responds. So by the time you've closed it, they're obviously not going to. It's too late by that point.
My flashlight just died. This happened, all right, so they went into the dark house. They somehow, they lost all their friends, but they somehow made it out. And they're running. And of course, as we said, there's no preparation, mainly because they don't expect to be potentially slowly chased by a monster. And they're running in the middle of a forest and their flashlight turns off, which is not good because it's a forest. So it's not usually like, here's the clear path, go ahead. And yeah, there you go. Just, it never works out that way. It's always going to just lead to more trouble when they're, whether you're running into the house while it's dark or running out of that scary house while it's dark. Neither option is really ideal. You never want to be running into any like dark, shadowed place in a horror movie.
Agree. Yeah, no question. Especially, usually we're trying to get away, probably, while we're in this case. We're not just like, let's wander over here. It goes back to the earlier slide about, we use the dark to represent the unknown, of course. And that's where we want to be going. That's where we want to be exploring. Remember that in the platform, of course, you can see where you're going in advance. Like you can see dynamic results as they come in. So if it's you, a couple other people who are on your team who need to be able to see, are we hearing from everyone? I absolutely do not recommend sending out the live results to every single person who participated. That's a terrible idea. That's obviously going to bias results. But if you and your team need to know, like, are people getting the questions? Do they understand? Especially if it's the first time you've used this instrument, you want to make sure that the questions are, getting the appropriate kinds of responses that people understand. If you find out that people are more or less answering the wrong question, for example, your results are not going to be useful. So being able to forecast that a little bit out ahead of you here, you can't see very far, but as long as your flashlight stays strong, you can see that what's coming up ahead. And it's so important because otherwise you are stumbling in the dark.
And you're not so tough. And I'm not trying to insult Bruce Campbell here, but often in these films, a character is, it's typically in my mind, just going with like typical horror movie cliches. Usually they're wearing a Letterman jacket. And they're saying, no, don't worry, I got this. It's all good. And we know that only spells trouble for them. They do not have this. It is not all good. And they are not as tough as they're trying to be.
Exactly right. And we talked about this at the beginning, like get expert help and advice along the way. It could be us. It doesn't have to be us. But often it is us at this point in the show where you're like, so I did this thing. And then when you sort of look up as you're explaining it, you're like, you can tell already, like this is going to be a tough one to get yourself out of. So do ask for help. If it's us, like we can help you, other people on your team, make sure that you are figuring out, address those issues as they come, as much as possible too. And remember, you don't have to do it by yourself, right? This might turn out to be the last time you do this particular project, but the next one is going to be a better project if we can get some of those lessons learned along the way. One of the biggest lessons is
Keep running. Yeah. So maybe the flashlight didn't die, but they're continuing to run through a forest or anything like that, whether it's Melissa's forest or my forest. And yeah, they either trip on a route, and in the meantime they're like, oh, all right, I just tripped, I should probably tie my shoelaces, or they hide behind a tree for whatever reason. Like, you don't know why they stopped running, and yet they just were like, yeah, we'll just hide behind a tree for a minute. You're like, for me, I'm screaming at the screen saying, why did you stop run? Like, all right, you tripped, get back up, it's time to go. Like, this is not the time to and yeah. Yeah, keep running. That's if you ever find, anyone finds himself in a scary movie, just keep running.
There's being out of breath for like a second, and then there's being completely out of breath. So, not to be too gruesome, but like, it usually doesn't end well when people turn around. Again, the good news is you're not in a horror film, as far as we know. So learn from those mistakes as you go, but keep going. Okay, like, okay, I went into the woods on this path, but that was not a good move. Next time, I'm not going to go down that path. So avoid making those same mistakes. It's something that you can, make note of, move along if you need to. If there are some things that you find really need to be resolved quickly, okay, maybe there's a typo, fix the typo. We are very cautious about editing live surveys, but it is an option that you have in some cases. So if you realize you left off an answer option, or you forgot a question, something like that, or the opposite is true, like this question actually shouldn't have been included, for example, you can change those things, but keep in mind that's going to compromise your reporting a little bit too. So you're going to have to be extra careful with your analysis, talking about before the change and after the change and this kind of thing as well too. In many cases, it makes more sense to just keep going unless it's absolutely critical to your results, to make those changes as well. So again, it's probably, hopefully, not the only conversation that you'll ever have with this audience, with this group of stakeholders as well too. If it's absolutely critical, there are those things like switch invitations. I'll just sort of whisper it. This is like, oh no, a disaster, I need to switch all of the links to a better, improved survey. There are some of those things as well too, but at a certain point, I don't want to say it's just a survey, but somebody told me this once, and I was like, okay, you're right. It is not the end of the world if these questions are a little bit tricky and we need to do better next time. So save yourself, keep going, and learn as you go. Which brings us to, whoop. Yep, too soon.
No, that's just a little teaser for the final slide. Yeah. Let's just bury it so no one will ever know. Happened in plenty of horror movies, as Melissa and I have talked about. For me, it reminds me of like, I Know What You Did Last Summer, or Scream. I feel like a lot of the 90s horror movies really hit on this point. The characters have some big truth or revelation that they make a pinky promise pact not to tell anybody.
Oh, it's real.
Once you do the pinky promise, you have to keep it. It's legally binding. But the truth will come out. Like, they're not going to introduce that in the movie. Just at the very end, everything's resolved. They're like, you guys remember that one time? And they're all like, don't worry about it. Yeah, we said we wouldn't talk about it anymore. Like, that is always going to be an integral part of the story from beginning to end. It's usually going to be the reason for all these scary events taking place.
Of course. And the scariest thing for us when we hear people working on projects is when we ask a question, so what are you going to do with the results? And they say, oh, I don't know. Well, why are you doing this? Oh, we do it every October. What? Like, that's your reason? And so what usually happens with those results is they do get buried. They get tucked away somewhere, or they get archived, they get printed out and put in a desk drawer, filing cabinet, binder, or something like this. Why are you even doing this? Like, you took the time to go through this whole process, ask the questions. If you decide to bury this data, do nothing with the results, don't take action on it, what do you think is going to happen the next time that you reach out to that same audience? This will haunt you, as you might think, right? That people are not going to participate again. They're going to say, well, what happened to the last answers I gave you? Like, what did you do about that? I'm reporting the same things, might be having the same issues. It's unbelievable. Like, why would you think, like, I have a conversation with you and you never respond to me, but I just keep talking to you? Like, okay, that's it's possibly a personality question as well, but definitely on the participant side, you want to take the best possible care of them. And you want to make sure that, yes, they do know that the truth wasn't buried. It was set free. Like all of these things have been used for positive effect. Yeah, not just buried underground where nothing will ever come of this until, of course,
there's a sequel. So maybe at the end of the first movie they bury something, but you know for sure when the second movie comes out, that secret will be there. And as going full circle here, a studio, movie studios often, they get the high return on investment, and immediately and understandably, they want to make a sequel with around the same budget, hoping that they can build on the popularity of the first one. And when done right, it can be done very effectively. When done, incorrectly, I think of like the Blair Witch Project 2. Yeah, which is a deep cut. That's a deep reference. But Blair Witch Project 2 could be a box office disaster. And most of these, the best sequels, not even just horror movies, just generally in film, take the core of the first movie, but evolve it. It stings to see a sequel, and it's just the same thing with a couple of different actors and maybe one creepy house instead of another creepy house. It's never going to, it's never going to bring that high return on investment if some things aren't changed, some things evolve for the better.
Adam, is there a key phrase that you'd like to share with us regarding how you feel about this piece of advice?
Don't replicate, innovate.
See, underscore. What can I say there, right? Like, hopefully, as we've said, hopefully you do have an ongoing conversation with that same audience. It's ridiculous to say, okay, customers, are you satisfied? Okay, thanks, that's it. Like, that's your only conversation. Like, we talk a lot more about, for example, customer experience or employee experience. We know that it's an ongoing situation. These people have lots of different interactions with you, with your brand, with your team, whoever your audience is. It should be an ongoing conversation. And hopefully you will have learned from those mistakes along the way, right? Like, obviously. There's so many pieces of advice here we've shared with you here today. So I'd love to take a minute. If you have some items that you want to share with us, you can just chat them to us as well, and we will add them to our list. Again, a lot of these are really common, especially in scary movies, but horror movies, a lot of B movies in general as well too. So the overlap of the scary horror B movie genre is probably where our sweet spot is in this conversation. On the survey side of the game, we've been collecting these from people who've registered for the session, who've shared with us over the past week or so, some of the scariest things that have happened to all of you. And so one of the big ones is, of course, forgetting to make questions mandatory. That's terrible. You made the question mandatory for a reason, and it's because you absolutely need that data in order for your results to be useful. But I would say the opposite is also horrific, making too many questions mandatory. So this one is scary for you, but making too many questions mandatory is scary for your participants. Like, they're going to take a look at that. They'll see that all of that blinking red asterisk, and don't think it's about the color red. It's the fact that it's required. So you absolutely can change the color of the asterisk, but making that many questions mandatory is prohibitive for people. It's a little bit too scary as well. The second one here is often relates to mandatory as well. That idea of piping. You know that piping takes information from one question and puts it somewhere else. It could put it into the text of another question or into the answer options of that other question. If you fail to make that original source question mandatory, piping might not follow up. People might not choose to answer that question. So instead it'll say, instead of saying, how did you feel about this webinar, it'll say, how did you feel about ? And people just think like, you run out of words, you missed something there. That is unfortunate. Adam, you want to talk about bad responses?
Yeah, bad responses, a bit of an with just those two words, bit of an abstract, it's a little abstract because bad responses could either be, depending on how it's viewed, some people could see bad responses as maybe responses they weren't hoping for, insightful responses, but answers that they weren't hoping for, maybe Maybe it was an area that they thought, oh, all right, we're doing really well with this as an organization. And it turns out that there's some more work that needs to be done. Or for whatever reason, maybe there are spam responses, or you're getting joke responses, which is not helpful to improving your organization and gaining good insights. So it can go a bunch of different ways. It's I would say, I don't think sometimes, well, it's not fun to hear responses about something you think you're doing well in, and then it turns out that there's a lot of room for improvement. I would definitely prefer that compared to joke responses or spam responses.
True. This is somebody, of course, this is a submission that we received, so I just love this one. It could be anything. It's like, that's not what you should say. Well, so that's why we ask the questions. You're going to see what people have to say. The last second half here is all about what I mentioned before, lack of responses. I loved this one, that it's like I sent the survey to a ghost town. Somebody told us as well. No responses is the scariest thing. Lack of responses or low response rates or zero response rates would be terrifying. Right? Like, hello, like what happened out there? Having a conversation by yourself is never very satisfying. It's really hard to close the loop with yourself. It's just this whole thing. And don't go into the scary basement alone, for sure. So hopefully a lot of this advice that we've looked at here today will be helpful for you to avoid some of these issues. Again, some of these are small things. They seem like small things, like, oh, of course, I just need to click that little thing to make it mandatory. That's helpful to know, but it's very hard to give equivalent advice for every single feature that you might apply. Oh, there was going to be quota management here. Oh, whatever the feature is that you're looking to use. That's so important to be able to get feedback from your team, the other experts, so you're not there alone in your field necessarily, but from our team as well here. That's why we're here, to give you this encouragement. I don't want to say scare you a little bit, but yes, scare you a little bit as well too, because these projects can be very, very useful for you. Of course, we know that the reality is we hope that you have, this gorgeous happy ending, but otherwise the reality is that it can be scary if you end up in the wrong situation. So I would say thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great chatting, and we love having these conversations, and we'll look forward to connecting with you again soon. So take care. Thanks for your time.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks for the feedback.
Thank you.